Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. So in this video, we will learn about overheads. Clear? So let's see the meaning of overheads. Overhead, it refers to all indirect costs incurred during the production or operation of a business. Overheads means what? All the indirect costs incurred during the production or operation of a business. Clear? So these are costs that are not directly traceable to a specific product or job but are still necessary for running the business. So overhead means what? It means all the indirect cost a business spends to keep running but not directly linked to making a product or services. So these overheads, these are supporting expenses like rent of the factory or office and salary of supervisors, electricity bills, office supplies. Clear? So in short, overheads means they are necessary cost to operate the business, but you can't trace them to one single product. You can't trace them to one single product. Clear? Here, direct cost means what? They are those which can be clearly identified with a specific product, job or process. Like, like direct material, direct labor and direct expenses. But here, overheads means they are the costs that are not directly traceable to a specific product, that is called as overheads. Clear? Now let's see the definition of overheads. According to CIMA, that is Chartered Institute of Management Accountants, it defines overhead as the total cost of indirect materials, indirect labor and indirect expenses. So overhead means what? Indirect material plus indirect labor plus indirect expenses. Clear? Means these all are the cost like indirect materials and labor and expenses. They are not directly traceable to a specific product. Clear? But they are necessary for running the business. But they are not directly relatable to the manufacturing of the final product. Only direct materials, they are identified with a specific product, but these overheads, they are non-identifiable, but they are still necessary for running the business. They are indirect material and indirect labor and indirect expenses. See, rent of the factory or office, this rent, that is not directly identified with a specific product, right? But that rent of the factory, that is necessary for running the business. And salary of supervisors, they are not directly related to the manufacturing of the final products, but they are necessary for running the business. And electricity bills, office supplies like stationaries, right? So these all are indirect cost. I hope the meaning of indirect cost, it is clear to you all. Now let's see the classification of overheads. So that is based on functions, elements and behavior. The classification of overheads, that is based on functions, elements and behavior. So first let's start with functions. So based on functions, see here, function wise overhead, it can be classified into factory overhead, administrative overhead, selling and distribution overhead and research and development overhead. So let's start with one by one. Clear? So based on function wise overhead, it can be classified into, so this function is there, right? So this classification tells us where the cost is incurred in the organization. So this based on function, this classification, it tells us where the cost is incurred, in the organization. So let's start with factory overhead. Factory overhead, it means what? Factory overhead, it is the total indirect cost associated with manufacturing activities. Factory overhead means it is the total indirect cost associated with manufacturing activities. Means all the indirect cost incurred inside the factory. Clear? Which are not directly linked to specific product but are essential to run the factory smoothly, right? That is what in overheads, right? So factory overhead means all the indirect cost incurred inside the factory. For example, factory rent. It means the cost of using the factory building. And depreciation on machinery means a value lost due to machine usage. And salary of the supervisors. They guide the workers but not make the products, right? And factory lighting and power. So electricity used for general factory operations, right? So these all are indirect costs that is incurred inside the factory. They are not directly identifiable with specific product, but they are necessary to run the business. Clear? So based on function, first classification it is factory overhead and second one it is administrative overhead. So administrative overhead, it means what? So it is the indirect expenses or indirect cost which are incurred at the office premises. Simple, right? So it is the indirect cost that is incurred at the office premises. So it means office related indirect cost. For example, office rent, we need to pay the rent, right? And office rent and rates, office lighting, postage, office salary, stationery. Clear? So these all are indirect cost, but they are not directly identifiable with the manufacturing of a final product, but they are necessary to run the business. That one you need to remember. Clear? So second classification is administrative overhead and third classification it is selling and distribution overhead. In that first discuss about selling overhead. It means what? It refers to those expenses which are associated with the marketing and selling activities. It refers to those expenses which are associated with the marketing and selling activities. It means all the indirect costs related to promoting, advertising and selling the products. So these expenses helps in increasing the sales, but they are not part of the production process. Remember, these selling expenses helps in increasing the sales, but they are not part of the production process. For example, advertisement expenses, salesman salary and commission, market research, cost of free samples or product demos. See, these all are examples helps to increase the sales, but they are not part of the production process. Clear? This is about selling overhead. And second one is distribution overhead. Distribution overhead. It means what? Here distribution overhead. 1 minute. It means it includes all the indirect cost related to the process of delivering the finished goods from the company to the customers. It means what? It means the indirect cost business spends to deliver the finished goods. To whom? To the customers. That is what distribution expenses. So these are the expenses that happen after the product is made, like packing, storing and transporting the product. See the examples: transportation charges, warehouse rent, packing cost, salary of distribution staff. Clear? So these all are expenses that happens after the product is made. Clear? So for selling overhead, that is, it helps to increase the sales, but they are not part of the production process. And distribution overhead, these are the expenses that happens after the product is made, like packing, storing and transporting the product. Clear? So first one is factory overhead, second classification is administrative overhead and third classification is selling and distribution overhead, and in that fourth one is research and development overhead. It means what? It means it refers to the indirect cost involved in creating new products or improving existing ones. Clear? So it refers to the indirect cost involved in creating the new products or improving the existing ones. Means these are the expenses company spends on experiments, testings and innovations, but not directly on production. Clear? For example, salary of research and distribution staff, cost of lab materials and equipment, software or tools used for testing new ideas. Clear? So research and development overhead means these are the expenses involved in creating the new products. Before creating new products, we need to research about the product, right? And if we want to improve the existing product, for that also we need to do research. That is what research expenses, research and development expenses. Clear? So based on functions, there are mainly four types. They are factory overhead, administrative overhead, selling and distribution overhead, and research and development overhead. Clear? Next, second one, it is based on elements. Based on elements. So this classification, that is based on the nature of the expenses. Here factory overhead, based on function means that classification tells us where the cost is incurred, and based on elements, this classification, that is based on the nature of expenses. Clear? So in that first classification, it includes indirect materials. It means materials that support production but not directly used. Means they are the materials used in the production process, but they are not directly the part of the final product. They support the production, but their cost cannot be traced to one specific product. Clear? For example, lubricants. Lubricants for machines and cleaning supplies, that is used in the factory, and nuts, bolts, screws, that is used in the general maintenance, and this stationery, that is used in production office. Clear? So this is about the indirect materials, means the materials used in the production process, but they are not directly part of the final product. In overhead, just you need to remember the materials or cost incurred or expenses incurred that are not directly identifiable with the manufacturing of the final product, but they are necessary to run the business. Clear? That is what you need to remember. And based on elements, second classification is indirect labor. It means what? Wages paid to workers not directly involved in production. Wages paid to the workers not directly involved in production. Means here paying of wages to the workers, but they are not directly identifiable with the final product. Clear? Wages paid to the workers who help in the production but not directly make the product, and their work supports the production process, but you can't link their labor to any one item. Clear? For example, supervisors, they guide the workers but don't produce, right? And maintenance staff, they repair the machines that is used in the production process. And quality checkers, they inspect the finished products. And storekeepers, they manage the raw materials and finished goods, right? So that is what? Indirect labor. And third classification is indirect expenses, means other overhead cost. It means what? They are the general business cost that support the production and administration but not directly traceable to one product, right? For example, factory rent, electricity bills, insurance, telephone and internet charges, office stationery and supplies. So these all are general business costs that support the production and administration. Clear? That is what? Indirect expenses. So based on elements, there are mainly three types, that is indirect materials, indirect labor and indirect expenses. So based on function is over, based on elements is over. Now last classification, that is based on behavior, that is based on behavior. Clear? So see here, yeah, based on behavior, it includes, see, this classification tells us how cost behave with changes in output. Clear? How cost behave with changes in the output. So in that first one is fixed overhead. Overhead which tends to remain unaffected by the fluctuations in the volume of production or output during a period of time, that is known as fixed overhead. Fixed overhead means what? Overhead which tends to remain unaffected by the fluctuations in the volume of production or output during a period of time. That is known as fixed overhead. It means it refers to the indirect costs that do not change with the level of production. Clear? The indirect costs that do not change with the level of production. For example, whether the company makes 100 units or 1000 units. These costs stay the same in total, that is fixed expenses. For example, factory rent, same amount every month, right? And salaries of permanent staff and insurance premiums, license fees, these all are same amount every month. Whether the company makes 100 units or 1000 units, these costs say the same in total. Remember, it refers to the indirect costs that do not change with the level of production. They remain same. Clear? And second one, it is a variable overhead. It changes in proportion to output. Fixed overhead, it remains unaffected by the fluctuations in the volume of production. But variable overhead, that changes in proportion to output. Clear? Changes in proportion to output. So it means indirect costs that change with the level of production. If production increases, the costs go up. If production decreases, they go down. For example, electricity that is used in machines. More production, more power used. Right? And indirect materials like lubricants or cleaning supplies. And repairs and maintenance. Although here you need to remember the variable overhead changes, but the cost per unit of output that tends to remain constant at different levels of output. Clear? That is, you need to remember that one. The cost per unit of output that tends to remain constant. Clear? Fixed overhead, it remains unaffected by the fluctuations in the volume of production, but in the variable overhead, changes in proportion to output. Means that change with the level of production, but the cost per unit remains same. Clear? And third one is semi-fixed or semi-variable overhead. It means they are partly fixed and partly variable. They are partly fixed and partly variable. They remain fixed up to a certain level of production, but increase step by step when production crosses certain limits. I will explain through an example. See here, telephone bill. That is fixed monthly rental. We need to pay the monthly bill, right? But extra charges if usage increases. Right? And second one is electricity bill. See, basic electricity, that is basic fixed charge, plus more cost as usage increases. And supervisor salary. See here, one supervisor, he manages up to 100 workers. Suppose one supervisor, he manages up to 100 workers. If 200 workers are there, then what we have to do? We need one more supervisor. Then salary increases. Right? That is what? Supervisor salary. Means semi-fixed or semi-variable. Means that is remain up to a fixed or remain fixed up to a certain level of output, but increase step by step when production crosses certain limits. See here, maintenance cost. Here some fixed cost every month we need to pay, but extra if machine runs more. Right? That is what maintenance cost. So here the classification of overheads is over. So on the basis of functions, there are mainly 4 types: factory overheads, administrative overheads, selling and distribution overhead, and research and development overheads. And based on elements, indirect material, indirect labor, and indirect expenses. And based on behavior, fixed overhead, variable overhead, semi-fixed or semi-variable overheads. Clear? This is about overhead. Here mainly you need to remember Overhead means the indirect cost incurred during the production or operation of a business. And these are the costs that are not directly traceable to a specific product. That is what overhead. I hope the meaning and classification of overheads are clear to you all. If not, please leave a comment. Thank you.